The variable that I would be working with in this Excel demonstration is the number of years of education for 47 individuals. We notice here, if we scroll down from cell A2 through A48, we have the numbers 1 through 47. So we're using information in that cell just to identify which case we're working with. We see instead the information in column B, data from B2 all the way down through B48 reports the years of education for each of the 47 individuals in this small data set. Now, before I begin to create a dot plot for this variable, I want to demonstrate two Excel functions that we will use. In a random cell, I'm going to merely type in equal REPT, and this is the repeat function. And you notice once I type in REPT before I include then the left parentheses, we can see a brief description. It repeats a text a given number of times. And what we'll see in a moment then, there actually are two components that we need to fill in for this repeat function to actually be carried out. So let me go ahead and open my parentheses, type in the left parenthesis, and you notice now we type in text information. And what I'm going to do is type in a capital X, but embedded within two double quotation marks. Anytime we're typing character information, repeating it in this function, we have to put it between two double quotation marks. Now, comma, and I will enter then the next parameter that we need to specify, and that is the number of times I want that capital X to be repeated in this cell. And in this case, let's say we repeat it 4 times. Right parenthesis to close our parentheses, and hit enter, and there you see the capital letter X is repeated 4 times. Now let's go back up, and let's, instead of reporting a character information, let's report a numeric variable. Let's put in the number 9, and let's say we want to repeat that 6 times. Now you notice here I did not put the 9 between double quotation marks. If we have numeric information, the double quotation marks are not necessary. I hit enter, and there what I see are 6 9s that are reported in that cell. And so that's the use then of the repeat function. But instead of using one of the characters on a computer keyboard, we can use another Excel function to display other symbols and characters in a cell. This is the Unicode function, and Unicode here stands for Unicode character. And typing, and I'll just go down a cell here, equal UNICHER, Unicode stands for Unicode character. We can see then a description of the function comes up. It returns the Unicode character referenced by the given numeric value that is entered between parentheses for this particular function. The Unicode character list, it contains more than 128,000 characters and symbols. For instance, let me go ahead and type in the left parenthesis, just open up my parentheses, and what I'm going to type in is the number 163, and then close the parentheses by typing in the right parenthesis. Now this is referring to the Unicode character number 163, and if we hit enter, we'll see that that's the British pound sign. We can go back up. Instead of displaying the British pound sign with that Unicode character, what we can do instead, let's change that from Unicode character number 163. We'll change it to 946, and what we see displayed now is the capital Greek letter beta. Around the number 128,000, we'll start to find that there are emojis in the list of Unicode characters, and it's kind of fun to play with and see what actually is all up there. For instance, what I'm going to do here is change the number 946. Let's now instead display the Unicode character number 128522. So the Unicode character 128,522, and we see now we have a smiley face that's displayed. So the Unicode character function allows us then to identify characters in the Unicode character list, the generic list that we see that are identified by numeric values and assigned numeric values then. And that's the way in which we can go about displaying information in an Excel spreadsheet that is itself not a symbol or an image that appears on a computer keyboard. Now we can take the unicar function and embed it in other functions, such as the repeat function we introduced a moment ago. Equal REPT to open up the repeat function, left parenthesis, and what we're going to do now is type in UNICHAR, unicar, and what we're going to do here is type in the Unicode character number 128,522, which of course we know, as we just showed you a moment ago, is a smiley face, and I close then that parentheses, comma, and now let's specify then the number of times that smiley face will be displayed. Let's type in 11 to display that smiley face 11 times. So you notice then the very first part of this formula, the unicar character portion of the formula, is identifying which character or symbol do we want to be repeated. Comma, the second part is indicating how often we want that character to be repeated. Hit enter, and if you count that, you'll see that there are 11 different smiley faces that are reported here. So we're going to find then the repeat function and the unicar function together are going to be really useful for us in terms of constructing dot plots. Now, for building a dot plot, we will use, instead of a smiley face or a number, we'll use a large dot to represent each case in a frequency distribution. And this is going to be the character associated with the Unicode numeric value 11,044, so 11044. So let's go ahead and demonstrate what these dots will look like. I'll open up now my formula, type in repeat. I'm going to repeat a particular Unicode character, this being a dot, multiple times. So now I type in unicar, left parenthesis, 11044, and that's the numeric value for Unicode character value for a dot, a large dot, comma, and now I'll specify how many times I want that reported or repeated within a cell. Let's say 4. Let's go ahead, close my parentheses, and hit enter. And right there we have it. 4 dots are displayed in a cell. And we'll find in a moment then that the combination of the repeat function as well as the unicar function in order to report dots in our cells will be useful for us in constructing dot plots. Now let's begin to construct our dot plot. Let me go ahead and delete this information that we see here, and I'll just go ahead and highlight the columns and just delete those columns altogether. And now we're back to the data that we started with, that is the case number and also the number of years of education for 47 individuals contained within the sample. The first thing we'll need to do to create a dot plot is to create a frequency distribution for these data. So below the column for the variable, the first thing I will do is I will want to identify the number of cases that we have here. So n equals for the number of cases. I also want to identify the minimum values and also the maximum values. Now the minimum and maximum values are important for us because we need to know then what bin labels do we need to include in our frequency distribution and hence in our dot plot. So I will type in the command equal min, min function, open parenthesis, highlight the data range, which you'll see here is in cell B2 through B48. I don't want to include the label of education. And I can just hit enter, or in this case I can go ahead and close parentheses and then hit enter. So the minimum value is 6 years of education for the sample. Now let's do the same thing for finding the maximum value. In that case, equal max. Max is the function for maximum value. Highlight again the data range that we have here, and we see 17 years of education is the highest. And I'm also going to now indicate how many cases there are in our data. In that case, I'll use the count function, equal count, and in parentheses we put the data range like we have every other time in the past. And there we see, as we know, that there are 47 different individuals in our sample. So that's information we need to know before we go about then and beginning to construct our frequency distribution in order for determining then what will be the bins we use for our dot plot. The next thing I'm going to do now is start to list the bins that we will use for this frequency distribution and hence in this dot plot. So I'm going to come down to cell E57, and the reason why I'm going to start to construct my frequency distribution and dot plot down here is because we're eventually going to start to manipulate the size of the columns, the width of the columns, and this is a nice way then of not messing up the way in which the data looks. We don't have to start here, this is just where I like to start, so it's away from where the data are. In that case, in this cell, what I'm going to do is type the number 6, and in the cell next to it to the right, I will type the number 7, and you see this is where we're going to start to identify the bin labels for our frequency distribution. I will highlight both of those cells and just move the cursor to the lower left-hand corner, or right-hand corner rather, of these two cells. You notice a cursor, a thick plus sign becomes a thin plus sign. Hold down the left mouse button and drag to the right. And what I want to do then is to have the highest value in this data series to be 17, which is what's going to be the case there. So that will give us then the bin labels that we will use for our frequency distribution. That is the basis for our dot plot. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is start to construct the frequency distribution. And what I'm going to do here is use the COUNTIF function. If you're not familiar with the COUNTIF function, there's another tutorial that demonstrates in my series here on my YouTube channel how to use the COUNTIF function in order to construct a frequency distribution. Equal to begin the formula, and it's just as it's spelled, COUNTIF. And now I'm going to open up the parentheses, and here what I'm going to do is identify the data range. And I can just click and drag to highlight that data range, or I also know the data are in the range B2 through B48. I could have just typed that in as well. And now comma, and what I want to specify is how I will go about counting cases falling in this particular bin. Now the very first value is going to be a value of 6, so I can put in my criterion of 6 and hit enter. And there are 3 people then in this list of 47 students that have 6 years of education. But let's make this more general, and in this case, instead of just typing in the number 6, let me delete that, and now just type in the, click on the cell that already contains the number 6, that first bin label, and hit enter. And what we'll see in a moment, that makes our formula far more flexible than just typing in the number itself. What we're going to do now is copy then this formula across the row for finishing up constructing our frequency distribution. Now to do that, what I want to do is to make then my data range to be a fixed reference as opposed to the relative reference that it is right now. If we were copying down a column and we want to keep the data range the same, we would put dollar signs in front of the numbers, that is fixing the rows, the rows constant. What we're going to do instead, since we're copying across the cells, we're not going to be changing the rows as we copy across, but what will change will be the column. So in that case, I need to put a $ in front of the column designation in my formula, that being the letter B. I could also include then a $ in front of the 2 and the 48, just to make it a fixed formula all the way through. But for right now, all I need is the $ to keep then the columns the same. Since the row, we're copying across the row, the rows are not going to change. Hit enter, and we see that formula we have here. Now let's go ahead and click and drag that formula across the range of our data points that we have, our bin labels. And you notice then we see a different count. Let's go ahead and double click on one of these cells, and you notice that what changes is the criterion changes because we've copied the formula across from E57 to F57, copied across one column, but the data range stays the same, B2 to B48. So I will hit enter here, and that's just to show you that this formula did exactly what I wanted it to do. By fixing then the columns, I'm able to copy that across, and I don't change then the data reference when I construct then my frequency distribution. So now we have a frequency distribution, and as we scroll across here, we'll notice then what I can do is simply sum this up to make sure that I've properly entered in the formulas across. I would just highlight then the frequency counts, which are in that row, and I should get a value of 47. And yes, I do, and that indicates then that I've entered that in properly. Let me go ahead and delete that since I don't need that information there. And what we see here right now is the range of bin labels or years that we're going to include in our dot plot. Now, instead of reporting the frequencies in each cell in numeric form, a dot plot reports a dot for each case that falls into a particular bin. So what I'm going to do now is specify, instead of the number, specify what I want to be reported in this cell. And this is where we're going to start to use then the repeat function and eventually the Unicode function. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the cell that contains the formula for the frequency of cases that completed the fewest number of years education in the sample. So I go above the bin label of 6 where that cell is, and right there that's what we have then in cell E56 is where the formula that counts the number of cases that have 6 years of education. So I clicked on that cell. Let's now move to the cursor bar up into the formula bar that we see, with the cursor up to the formula bar rather, and I'll place the cursor in this formula just after the equal sign. Right mouse button click there to put it there. Now I'm going to type in REPT, so I'm using the repeat function, left parenthesis, and then in double quotes I will type in then a capital O, and now I also then will add in a comma and move my cursor to the end of the formula now and type in the right parenthesis to close my parentheses. And right there we have it. We now have 3 zeros. Now let's look at what this formula is doing. Repeat the capital O. How many times? Well, the number of times is determined then by the countif function. And what does the countif function do to determine how many cases fall in this bin? It takes the data range and it counts each time one of the cases meets the criterion that's identified in cell E57, which is the number 6. So let's go ahead, now that I have this in, let's go ahead and copy this entire formula across. And what we see now, where there were numbers representing the frequency of cases, now we see a capital O that's being used to represent each case that falls into each category. But what we have here, though, is information where the O's are printed across. Instead, the O's should be in a column, one on top of the other. Now that's something that we can easily modify by highlighting the range where we have the O's reported, and with now my cursor on top of the range I've highlighted, I will click the, let me do that again, highlight that range, I will click the right mouse button, and I will come up to Format Cells, and what I'm going to choose now is the tab for alignment. And alignment here allows us to modify how information is reported within the cell. I'll come over to the orientation portion, that window of this Format Cells window. Move the cursor on top of the red diamond here, click and drag it to the top. And now I'll click OK. And you notice what it's done now. It's now reported the information that is listed on its side. And that's exactly what we want. But at this point, we don't want to merely report capital O's. Instead, we want to report a dot for each one of the cases. And let's face it, that's the reason why we call these dot plots. So to change the O to dots, I'm going to click again in this cell where the formula is contained above the bin label 6. I'm going to move the cursor up again to the formula bar. I'm going to click to put the cursor right after the double quotation that closes in the character capital O. Backspace to delete it. Now let me type in Unicar, and in parentheses I will put the Unicar numeric value of 11044. Again, close parentheses. And so what's going to be reported here, the text is going to be the dot, assuming that I have properly recalled the number of the black dot. And yes, I did properly recall that. Now let's go ahead and let's bring this all the way across. So now what we see then are dots that are reported where O's are reported. So we have one dot referring to each case. Let me go ahead and make sure then the tallest column of dots can be displayed within a cell. So I'll move the cursor over to where the row numbers are, move it to the bottom of row number 56 till it becomes then that double arrow that we see. Click and drag to then make that column or that row a little wider until we get to the point that we can see all of the cells, and all the dots rather, and I can see all the dots then right here. Now that we've constructed the basic dot plot, let's now format this dot plot to make it look a little nicer. And that's all we have left to do is do some basic formatting. The first thing I'm going to do is to narrow the columns that we have this data reported in. Notice all the blank space between each of these cells and each of the column of dots rather. So let me go ahead, move up to the top, and I'm going to click and drag to highlight then the columns. And we can highlight columns by, first of all, putting the cursor on the very first column designation, that being E, hold down the left mouse button and drag across. Oops, I went too far. Do that again, and right there we have it. Now with the cursor over top still of one of those letters, for designating the columns I will use the right mouse button. Up comes some options for modifying the columns. I'll come down to column width, and let's go ahead and type in 2.5. And what we see now, less space between than what we have for our different cells, and that's going to be a much nicer way in which we can present our information. Let me also then highlight the cells that have the dots in them as well as the bin labels. Right mouse button, and what I'm going to do this time now is to center their information in each one of the cells to make it more uniform, looks a little nicer. The next thing we can do is we can also then add a title here, and the thing I'm going to do now to make sure I can center the title properly is I'm going to highlight the range of cells right below the bin labels, right mouse button with that we see the Format Cells comes up, that window. And I'm going to go to the Alignment tab. So if another tab is selected, just click on the Alignment tab, and I'm going to merge those cells together into one large cell. Now what I'll do here is type in a title. Let's say it's Figure Years, I'm going to make it Education dot plot. Make it really nice and brief for my title right there. Now what I also may want to do is I may want to change then the format of this information we have here, the labels. And let me first of all highlight those cells, right mouse button, and let's change it to, let's go down to Book Antigua. That looks kind of nice. And maybe what I want to do now is to also make my my title a little bit larger. So I'll change that to a font size of 12. Make it a font size of 13. How about that? Let's see how that looks. I can go a little bit larger. Let's make it a font size of 14 so it really stands out that that's the title. And right there we have that font size of 14. And I can also click on that cell, right mouse button, and choose Center. So now it's centered. So what we have now is we've now changed the text that's used in terms of the font. But I can also modify the look of the dots themselves. Highlight the dots, and I can actually reduce the size of the dots by decreasing then the font size, such as what I've done there, or I can make them quite a bit larger by again increasing the font size. Let's make it a font size of 14. But let's go back to what we had a moment ago, the font size of 11. I think that looks nice. I can also modify the format of these cells, of these dots rather, highlighting them, right mouse button to open up the options we have. And if we go up to the font color, I can now change the font color to any font color I so desire. Let me make it a little bit smaller, a little bit different color, a little darker, and there we can add a little color to it if we wish. What I'll do is I'll go back then to my black dots we had a moment ago. Oops. Let's try that one more time. There's the black dot. So if you can print things up in color, and I typically reserve color for whenever I have a PowerPoint presentation, but it's something that's going to be printed up either by myself or someone else, I almost always go with some sort of grayscale. Not everyone has a quality color printer, and even if they do, color ink can be rather expensive. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, I like to have a little bit of extra space to the left and to the right of my graph. So let me highlight then, cell D, right mouse button, and I'm going to change the column width to 0.75. And I'll do the same thing then for the column right afterwards, 0.75, hit enter. And maybe I want to make the row that has the title in it a little bit different thick width. So I just click and drag to make that a little bit larger, perhaps the width there. And maybe that spacing looks nicer. And from here we can go ahead and copy this information into perhaps a Word document, which I'll show you in just a moment. But this is the basis then of constructing a dot plot using Excel. Now to copy and paste this into a Word document, one of the first things I'm going to do is change how it looks right now in terms of the grid lines. If I just went ahead and highlighted the range or the cells within which my dot plot is contained and just copied this and pasted it into Word, those grid lines would also be pasted into Word. I don't want that. So I'll come up under the View menu, left click to open that up, and you'll see here in terms of Show, Grid Lines. Check in that box to toggle off the grid lines option, and you notice now what we see down on the spreadsheet are no grid lines, and that's going to look a lot nicer when we copy this into Excel. So I'm going to click on the cell just before my dot plot and the cell just after, and come down and highlight the entire range of data that we see, all the information that we want in our dot plot. Right mouse button and merely copy. Now what I'll do in a moment is open up a Word document which I will paste this information into. So I've opened up Microsoft Word and I have a blank document. I can just then move the cursor somewhere in this document, right mouse button rather, and you notice the different options for paste. You can choose to determine which one works best. I always tend to go with the picture. That way the format and the spacing stays exactly as I had it before in my Excel file. Now I can click on that. It's now a picture. I'll come up to Home and I'm going to center that. And that's what we have here. I can now put text above and below, and I can also even modify the page layout here in Word to even put text around it on the sides perhaps. What I can also do though to set this off from the text that I may build or write around this figure, I'm going to left mouse button rather to highlight the figure. I'm going to right mouse button to open up options, what I can do to modify then this image. Click on Format Picture, and now I'm going to come over to the Fill in Line icon, the paint can. I'm going to come down and open up Line. I'll choose a solid line. Right now the default is a light blue. I want to change that to a black, and I can change the width of it, but 0.75 point size seems just fine. And I'll go ahead and close that. And now you notice then what we see here is a border has been placed around our figure. Make it easier perhaps to stand apart from the text. What I could also do is change the color that the background we see within this figure. Left mouse button to highlight then this figure. Right mouse button to open up the options. Again come down to Format Picture. I'll go back again over to Fill in Line. And a moment ago I changed the line option, added a line around it, and it's now go up to Fill. I'll choose Solid, and right now you notice the default is this blue. I'm going to change that instead perhaps to a very, very pale gray. And now I will close that. And so if I wish, I can now change the fill or the background that we see within this figure. Now you want to be careful about the fills that you use. It takes up more ink, and you want to make sure when you print these up that they actually turn out to be still legible based upon the printer. You don't know exactly how they're going to print up. But if I want to, I can even click on this figure and make it larger, or click and drag to make it smaller. But in any sense, this is how we go about constructing dot plots within Microsoft Excel, and then bringing them into a Word document with copying and pasting, and modifying some basic features of that plot. I hope this tutorial you found useful and easy to follow along with.